Hello and welcome to my latest video on how to paint this Raven Guard Space Marine. In this video we're going to be looking at how to paint the golden trinkets or awards or whatever they are on his shoulder that are dangling from the red cord that we painted previously. Now you can already see that I've painted on the two clips that attach the awards to the cord, and those were just painted quickly using heavy pale blue grey and a dot of white at the top. I just didn't manage to record them for the video. But anyway, so we're looking at how to paint these trinkets. The one that I'm painting at the moment is a bolter shell. I think that's awarded for marksmanship, and the other one is a Crux Terminatus, which points him out as a veteran. So the colours are going to be exactly the same as I've used for the other non-metallic gold on the chest and on the small little eagle on the bolt gun. And they'll be in the video description, but I'll also be providing the Games Workshop alternative colours as well, just in case you don't have the versions that I'm using. So I'm starting with English uniform. By the way, excuse me if my voice sounds a bit funny. I've just come back from honeymoon and I caught a cold while I was on the plane. So, anyway, so the first paint I'm using is English uniform, which again is exactly the same as I've done on the previous non-metallic colours. I thought it would be useful to show you how to do these trinkets in non-metallic gold, because they're a slightly different shape and they're a bit more tricky, so with the highlight placement and things like that, so it might just be interesting to see how it works. Now on the bolter shell, you can see there's one big highlight going down the left hand side of the shell, along with a line at the top, and then there's a section just above that, which would be where the powder is, I guess, for the explosive ammunition to fire it. So as later on, you're going to see that there'll be a secondary highlight on the right of the bolt shell, which will be reflecting from the Crux Terminatus. So the highlight on the left is the main highlight, and you can see why when I'm holding the model at this position, that shows you where the primary highlights are coming from. They kind of roughly match up with the highlights on the shoulder pad and things like that. As you can see, some of the highlights on the back, they can't all line up, because as you turn the model a little bit each time, you know, the highlights will move. So, or rather, they don't move as you turn it, whereas they should move to stay the same place as it rotates. Because they're painted on, they can't. So now I'm going into Japanese uniform, and now this is going over exactly the same areas that I've just highlighted, but in a smaller area. It's quite straightforward. One thing to note on the Crux Terminatus, which I haven't talked about too much at the minute, is that I've put more highlight from the English uniform on the lower left of the four cross sort of bits sticking out of the skull. That's not necessarily a realistic thing, but it's helping to create contrast. So at the top and to the right, those will be darker areas, and then when you paint the edges on in lighter colours, there'll be a high contrast point there, where the fade going out to the bottom area. So you can see on the wet palette there, obviously the English uniform was in the top right, and below that is the Japanese uniform. And the Japanese uniform obviously looks a lot more yellow. So at this stage as well, you can kind of see the contrast and the shine starting to come in. Also, so I said in the bottom left area of the Crux Terminatus, that there's more English uniform, but there is still a slight fade. So on the left of the cross pieces, it's darker at the top and lighter at the bottom, but it's still quite a large area of light highlight on that. Whereas if you look on the right hand side of the cross section from the Crux Terminatus, it's a very small amount at the bottom, but all of the upper edges have been highlighted. At the edges of each cross section there's a very small lip. These are very, very small, less than a millimetre, probably less than half a millimetre actually. So it will be quite hard to paint around them, but it's worth it if you can manage it. You'll see as the video progresses that I'll be picking out the details and the hard edges a bit more. The thing with the Crux Terminatus is, because it has these hard edges, they really have to be picked out to make the shine work, because that's where all the contrast is coming from. There's not a lot of space to get transitions, whereas on the skull in the centre there's obviously that nice big round forehead, which makes it much easier. So now we're on to ice yellow, and again this is going over the same points on the shell that we've already done with the previous two colours, but this really punches up the highlight. Now this is so it's not the final highlight stage. There is a pure white highlight stage, but this is the main the kind of final main highlight, because when the white's added, these are just very they're kind of dots as the highest point shine parts. You can see there that I just started to put the secondary highlight on with the ice yellow on the right hand side of the bolt gun, but that's really a bit too light for the secondary highlight, so I'll be tweaking that as I go along. Obviously this is zoomed in the video, so these look a lot larger than they are. If you see this in the hand, it's actually quite small, so don't be too worried if you find that it's really hard to paint, because in reality, as long as you get it roughly right, unless people are zooming in with their eyes, you won't see too many issues. So this is the trickiest part here, the lower section on the right of the Crux Terminatus. It's the final highlight on the bottom section of the transition on the left hand cross. Did I say the right of the Crux Terminatus? I meant the left. So you can see that that's the final highlight on the transition. So obviously you won't be going any higher on that. It's the white is just saved for the very highest points on the top section. But I say it's the hardest because it's a very, very fine mark you've got to do. You've got to make sure that most of the paint is off the paintbrush. When you apply the paint, if there's too much paint on it, you're going to make a very hard mark. Even if, so I don't mean that it's going to blob. Like, you should always be wiping off the paint from the paintbrush so that it doesn't blob. But even then, if there's enough paint on the paintbrush to make a hard mark, it's still going to look too obvious. You need it to be a very soft mark on there, so it still fits in with the transition. You don't want to just be hard step marks from the paintbrush being applied. So here you can see I'm using Mournfang brown, and now this again has to be applied very carefully. This is just to add a touch of warmth, so it's not just all high contrast colours. It just softens in, adds kind of that brown, warmy, orangey sort of glow, and just softens like the highlights a little bit, helping to transition into the shadows. And you can also see that this helps to separate it from the metal clips that are holding the trinkets onto the cord, because as the highlights were getting really high on these trinkets, they were starting to come close to the brightness of the clips, so that they blend in, and you don't really want that. You want them to look separate while still being shiny. So I did mention that the secondary highlight that I put on with the ice yellow from the Crux Terminatus was quite high from using the ice yellow, but actually, as I look at it in the video, it's I did actually decide to keep it like that because I haven't done a large mark. It's a very, very small mark. I can't stress enough how small this mark is in the flesh. But it just highlights, so you see at the top edge, it just kind of reflects that over. If you wanted to extend it a little bit more, you could soften it down. So here you can see from how I've painted the other edges, and there's also a little reflection on the elbow, and the elbow reflection is painted just with English uniform and Japanese uniform, and even then it's mainly English uniform, so you have to keep that as a softer highlight. And there's a close-up view so you can really see how it all looks together, and hopefully how the highlights were painted. Obviously, because it's such a small thing, it's quite hard to see clearly in the video. It's a very quick video. There'll be some more coming hopefully tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope it was useful.